joined by Matt Moscona, a good friend of the program. You can hear him, obviously, on ESPN in Baton Rouge, actually all over the great state of Louisiana. Matt, good morning, buddy. How are you?
David, great, man. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, man. It's good to catch up with you this weekend, and happy to have you here on the show. Let me ask you, from an LSU insider perspective, from a fan perspective, has this season been a letdown because of what last season was, or do you all look at it as just part of the process, losing to Florida State, obviously a team that's probably going to be in the playoffs, Alabama being the Alabama team that we're used to? Just how do you all look at the way this season has gone?
No, in totality, the season results are disappointing. Jaden Daniels' incredible season is salvaging a lot of that because it's been so much fun to watch. But on the other hand, David, you can't help but look at the season Jaden Daniels is having and think, man, if this defense was just good enough, they didn't have to be great. They just had to not be the worst LSU defense we've ever seen. And LSU beats Ole Miss and it has a great chance to beat Alabama and, probably Florida State. You're probably talking about a playoff team because the offense is literally the number one offense in the country. So there's definitely that cloud hovering over this season where you go, it's been so much fun to watch this offense. You hope Jaden wins a Heisman, but man, it feels like they wasted a great opportunity because the defense has been so bad.
Even though they wasted a great opportunity, that win against Missouri, the comeback, did that kind of save the way the season feels?
Man, whether this is right or wrong, this is just the reality. Nobody here is going to celebrate a win over Missouri. I know that sounds trivial because they're a really good team and they're probably going to finish 10-2. But I mean, this program and the expectations around it, Dave, are at the point now where you don't celebrate 10-win seasons here. And you understand, you're not going to win a championship every year. It's just not realistic. But there are just greater expectations, and a regular season win that would be celebrated, go on the road and beat Alabama and Tuscaloosa, yes. Going on the road to Como and outlasting Missouri in a day where neither team could get a stop, nobody's circling that in 10 years from now. Nobody's going to talk about that game. They'll talk about Jaden Daniels. They'll talk about this offense. But there hasn't been one marquee win on this schedule this year that people will remember or will celebrate for a long time. They'll celebrate the individual performances of Jaden Daniels and these receivers.
Matt, was there any evidence that you saw not to predict this kind of year from Jaden Daniels? Obviously, this is historic what he's doing, but that he would take a huge step. Did you see signs last year? Did you see signs during spring ball, fall practice that was like, man, this guy is going to be within the elite of the elites when it comes to the quarterbacks in the entire country?
Yes, so absolutely. And I'll listen. David, we all make picks. Sometimes we get things right, we get things wrong. I did pick LSU to win the SEC because I thought this was going to be the worst quarterback year we'd seen in the SEC since 2014. I think you and I probably talked about this at media days. And I thought LSU had the best guy. Not only that, but keep in mind a year ago, for a lot of the criticism that Jaden got, what people often overlooked was your best running back was a former walk-on, and your offensive line used 6 different combinations through the first 8 games. Your line was a sieve. You had 2 true freshmen starting at tackles. You didn't really have a great running back. Jaden had to do everything last year, and he accounted for 70% of your production. So with a better offensive line, your receivers a year older, obviously more development under Mike Denbrock in this offense, and the commitment Jaden took, and Brian Kelly's talked about this a lot, that they had to give him key card access to the building because he was showing up every day during the summer at 5 a.m. to go watch film. So they just gave him access to the building. Those are the types of things that whenever a player is going into his final season of college football and he takes that step and takes it upon himself to make sure he's improving himself and everything else around him got better, it was obvious they were going to be good. Now, I didn't think he'd be setting records and, the 3,500 yards passing, 1,000 yards rushing. Manziel's the only one that's done that in the history of the SEC until Jaden. He's doing things that I don't think any of us would have predicted realistically. But did I think he would take a jump? Yes, I absolutely thought that. So I had LSU before the season winning the SEC and going to the playoff. And it wasn't a homer take. It was just that I thought the league was going to be down and LSU's quarterback would be good enough to get him there. Where I missed, David, was on the defense. I just didn't see it being this bad.
So how did it get so bad? Did they miss on talent? Is it scheme, combination of things?
All of it. It's layered, okay. But when Ed Ogeron got fired, I think a lot of people may know this. They had 38 scholarship players on the roster for that bowl game against the Texas Bowl against Kansas State. So last year they went and remade the secondary with transfers, and they hit on all those guys. Greg Brooks and Joe Fouché and Jarek Bernard Converse and Mekhi Garner. They weren't like elite players, but a lot of those guys made NFL rosters this year. Well, all of them left, and so they had to do it again. And they just missed on all those guys in the secondary. They missed on Denver Harris and Duke Chestnut, and J.K. Johnson was hurt, and Zy Alexander's the guy that was playing, and he got hurt. So, I mean, you got a whole bunch of freshmen. You missed on all the transfers, and you'll have a whole bunch of freshmen. And it's been really bad. They tried to make Harold Perkins an off-ball linebacker, and that was a big miss. And so they've had to sort of, tinker with him throughout the course of this season. It just, everything they've tried has gone wrong. They don't tackle well. They don't cover well. They don't have good run fits. I mean, there's going to be a major overhaul of this defensive staff in the offseason. It's justified because you can't be as bad as they've been, and they're bad at every level.
Am I right? Denver Harris is actually not with the program at all right now. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. He, I mean, I'm sure you all know a lot about his time there, but
yep.
That's one where they took a shot, man. They took a shot on a guy who made some poor decisions. And I think schematically he wasn't exactly a fit for what they were trying to do right away, and he didn't take well not being on the field. Right. And so he's with the team. It's a miss. It's just a miss.
With so much talk of Jaden Daniels, does it feel like sometimes Malik Neighbors is ignored in these offensive conversations? Not that defenses are ignoring him, obviously, but just the talk, the buzz around him?
Yeah, well, nationally, yes. I think what's going to surprise a lot of people is when the draft rolls around. I mean, David, I'm sure you talked to scouts, all of those connections as well. I mean, everyone I talk to has him going in the top 20. I've heard as high as the top 10, maybe the second receiver off the board. He's a special player. I mean, he's a guy that can beat you over the top, and he's strong enough and willing to go over the middle and make tough catches. Brian Kelly talked about it this week. Malik can play all three positions, and that's the thing he had to learn this offseason to commit himself to not just being taken out of a team's game plan. Malik is great. He's just not he's not going to win the Blitnikoff because everyone knows Marvin Harrison. But he's worthy because of the season he's having this year. I mean, he's leading the nation in receiving yards, and he's right up there in receptions. And I think he's maybe one touchdown off the national lead. He's got the stats, and in any other year, if there wasn't a guy named Marvin Harrison who's had the type of career he has at Ohio State, he'd win the Blitnikoff. But Malik's special, man. He's as good a receiver as LSU's had here in the last decade. That's a mouthful considering some of the guys that are gone up to the NFL and done what they've done at the next level.
So, Matt, obviously A&M is looking for a head coach, and some of the things that others have said out there is like, it's got to be a fit for A&M. Well, LSU went through that with the whole Brian Kelly experience, and there was talk, is he going to be a fit? Is he going to be a fit? Does fit matter, or is it just really about winning?
I think fit can matter. But David, this is the answer I always gave when people would ask about Brian Kelly. The winningest coach in the history of LSU athletics is Skip Bertman, who won 5 national baseball titles in 10 years. He's a Jewish guy from Miami. The winningest basketball coach ever had was Dale Brown, who's from Minot, North Dakota. The best football coach LSU's ever had here was Nick Saban, who's born in West Virginia, spent his entire career in the Midwest. I don't know if you've been down here, but South Louisiana culturally is a little bit different, to say the very least. You just have to win. I mean, you can be from anywhere. I mean, Dan Mullen had nothing in common with Starkville, Mississippi. That was a guy from New Hampshire, and he's the best coach they'd ever had there. So I understand why we focus on fit and why we think that matters, but really, you can overcome it if you have a plan and you can recruit and you can win. I mean, winning overcomes all of that.
100% agree with that. I feel like if you get the culture, it's bonus points. But if you're winning, it doesn't really matter, man. But it is cool when people understand what it means to be an Aggie and kind of embrace that. But at the end of the day, get the wins and people can kind of put up with a lot?
I'll be and I agree, and I think everyone understands that Texas A&M is a unique place. Now, that word's often misused and overused. I mean, unique means one. Like, there's literally only one. There's no place that has the sort of the culture that Texas A&M has. So I do understand why there's a thought to saying, hey, let's hire some, like why Jeff Traylor makes sense being from Texas, why Elko makes sense because he's been there. But you're going to tell me if Nick Saban were willing to leave and we're going to A&M, like, he wouldn't win in College Station? Of course he would. I mean, there's great coaches that know how to win wherever they are. The bigger thing, and I'll tell you this from an LSU fan's perspective, David, and I think A&M fans will appreciate this, that the concern with A&M always is that if they ever do get it right, they're trouble. Because A&M has the resources. You have the facilities and the recruiting base, and you got the fan base and the support and everything you need to win. But they just never gotten it right with the head coaching hire. And David, that was LSU for a long time. And the state of Louisiana is chock full of talent. You're the only Power 5 in a talent-rich state. You got great support. But you went from Mike Archer to Curly Holman to Jerry DiNardo, and it was just, you just could never get it right until they hired Nick. And that was the magic unlock, and it set off a quarter century of what we've seen from LSU, where they've won 3 national titles and played for a 4th and all the stuff that you know. So I know that's always why people focus on A&M, because of the potential. That's why nobody's concerned about Arkansas or Ole Miss, because it doesn't matter even if they have a great coach. The best coach they ever had there, as soon as they do well, they're going to leave because there's a ceiling. That's always the thought with A&M, is if they ever figure it out and make the right hire, they're trouble.
Were you surprised that Jimbo wasn't able to get it right? Maybe not towards the end, but whenever they initially hired him.
Yeah, I thought it was a great hire. I mean, my thought with hiring always is you minimize risk, right? If you have the resources and you can eliminate risk with your hire, then you do that. So if you're Texas A&M and you have the resources and you hire a coach that had won a national title and had been a super successful head coach, you've minimized risk. That doesn't mean it's always going to work. But, like, for example, I was very critical when LSU hired Ed Ogeron. LSU had won 2 national titles at that point and played for a 3rd in a relatively short amount of time. Like, there was no reason to rush Ed Ogeron to a podium. Now, you had the one moonshot with 2019, which was incredible, but the rest of his tenure here was marred by off-the-field issues and embarrassments. I mean, I would still accept all of that because 2019 was fantastic. Look at the Brian Kelly hire and the Ed Ogeron hire. They're polar opposites. Brian Kelly's on field the winningest active head coach in college football. I mean, LSU didn't need to take a giant risk. They hired a very proven coach and said, we're going to give you all the resources you need to win. So when I looked at it very similar, I mean, it's obviously not coincidental that it was Scott Woodward who made both hires, but yeah, I thought it would work with Jimbo there.
Talking to Matt Moscona here on TexAgs Radio. Do these players, I'm sure the fans think about last year, but do these players consider what happened last year and how A&M was a part of the reason that they weren't in that national conversation for a playoff spot? A lot still had to happen, but I don't think anybody was expecting what happened at Kyle Field a year ago.
No, I mean, that was one, obviously, where when you look at LSU and Brian Kelly trying to rebuild a program, that was a day where they got napped, where they got caught napping, and a talented team played up to its potential and won a football game. As far as, like, is there this lingering feeling from a year ago? Not really. Just this, honestly, that hasn't really been any part of the chatter here this week. I think people know the talent that's on that A&M team, and certainly last year was an illustration that A&M's capable of coming to LSU and winning on Saturday. But honestly, that's not really been the narrative here this week, talking about what happened last year.
Talking to Matt Moscona here on TexAgs Radio. So I look at some of these games that LSU played in this year. As I look at the Arkansas game was close. Obviously, Bama, we know what kind of team they are. When LSU does struggle, or the games are a little tighter than expected, what's the why behind it? Is it the defense? Because as good as that offense is, some of these losses, like the offense hasn't really been incredible.
The offense has been incredible in the losses. The Alabama game, Jaden got knocked out. didn't play the fourth quarter. They have to be flawless. Go back and look at Florida State. David, LSU put up 300 yards in the first half against Florida State. They were leading at halftime of that game. They had 2 possessions inside the 10 where they came away with no points. I mean, LSU could have been leading that game by 17 at half, but that's the problem. Like, you have to, the defense is so bad that against great teams, the offense has to be flawless. I mentioned the Florida State game. It was a 1-score game. On the last play of the third quarter, Daniels throws a deep ball to Brian Thomas that would have been a walk-in touchdown, and Brian Thomas dropped it. You would have had a tie ball game going into the fourth quarter. On the first play of the fourth quarter, Malik Neighbors slipped on an out route, and the ball got intercepted. That's what I'm talking about with the margin. Like, the offense has to be perfect because the defense is so bad. Now, the real question is A&M for Saturday, is A&M's offense good enough to take advantage of a bad defense? Because Mississippi State wasn't, Auburn wasn't, Army wasn't, but Missouri, Ole Miss, Arkansas, Alabama, they all were. So where does A&M fall in that sliding scale is the answer to Saturday.
Is there a point total that, like, obviously LSU can score 50, like that they can do that, but if A&M is in the 30s, is that an area of concern, or does A&M need to score more than that against LSU?
If A&M only gets into the 30s, they're not going to win the game. But LSU could allow 40. It's just, Dave, you're going to see it, man. It's like, I get it. A lot of people don't sit down and watch. I mean, I've watched every play of this season. LSU defensively is atrocious. It's so odd to say because it's a program that's made its calling card on defense for so many years. You'd never think you'd see it this bad, but they are that bad. For context, the totals for LSU this year, I believe, are 10-1 on the over. Like, every game goes over. Even Vegas hasn't caught up to it this year. LSU is going to score as much as they need to score, and the defense just hopes to maybe get a couple of stops a half. If you do that, you got a chance to win in a shootout. That's what happened against Arkansas. That's the stop they couldn't get against Ole Miss.
Matt, great stuff, brother. Thanks so much for your time today.
Okay. See you, David. Thanks, man.
Thank you, sir.